The hall shimmered like the inside of a jewel, its crystalline walls refracting starlight in fractured rainbows that fell across rows of alien nobility. Spires of violet flame hovered in the air, floating lanterns of some luminous gas, their slow pulsing timed to the orchestral hum of a dozen species instruments. The bride stood at the center of it all, pale veil draped like a cascade of moonlight down her shoulders, her breath tight but steady. She was human, which made her exotic here, fragile, some whispered. A curiosity, others said. A symbol of Earth's attempt to stand shoulder to shoulder with civilizations that had been carving empires, while humanity was still writing folk songs on cave walls. She smiled anyway, a nervous but stubborn curve of the lips. The crowd didn't know whether to laugh or applaud when the human custom of cake arrived. A three-tiered tower of sweetened bread and cream drew murmurs of disbelief from insectoid dignitaries who lived on mineral slurry, from scaled monarchs who had never once tasted sugar. Children of the Nevarin caste hissed their amusement when one of the human attendants cut slices with an absurd silver knife. "They bring knives to dessert," a lizard lord muttered, and his entourage chittered with laughter. The bride flushed but held her chin high. Every gesture was being judged, every glance weighed. Her people were the newcomers to the stage, and the galaxy's audience was merciless. Still, some looked on with curiosity rather than contempt. A feathered elder, her wings bent by age, whispered to her kin that humans seemed to find joy even in their smallest rituals, and perhaps there was strength in that. A reptilian scholar, his voice like gravel and rain, leaned forward, intrigued by the human song that followed, an off-key rendition by her cousins of an old Earth ballad, so earnest in its awkwardness that it earned more chuckles than claps. But even the laughter carried fascination. For the bride, each note, each crumb of cake, was a shield. She was alone among titans, but she had chosen this union knowing what it symbolized. A bridge, a dare, a promise that Earth was no one's pet world. Her hands trembled only when no one watched. Then came the ripple. The music faltered. The floating flames dimmed. A shadow fell across the hall, and every head turned. The Galactic King entered without announcement. His presence silenced even the laughter. He was colossal, his armor a living thing, scaled plates that shifted as though they breathed. His eyes burned like stars collapsing, and when he spoke, the hall shook. "Is this the wedding?" he asked, his voice honeyed with disdain. A playhouse feast for children? Some aliens bowed, others looked away, but many smirked, emboldened by his mockery. The king had ruled longer than Earth had known electricity. His word was thunder, and no one dared contradict thunder. The bride steadied herself, but her veil quivered as his guards marched behind him, massive creatures bred for war. One brushed against the cake table, knocking it askew. Cream splattered across the crystalline floor. A ripple of laughter spread again, this time sharp-edged. The king circled the bride as if inspecting a trinket. "So fragile," he said. He reached for her veil, and before she could step back, he tore it free. Gasps filled the air. Her hair spilled out dark and unbound. Her face bared not as a jewel, but as a woman, flushed with humiliation. This is what Earth offers. A doll dressed in cloth, trembling like prey before a hunter. The hall buzzed with cruel amusement. Some whispered gleefully of human weakness. Others turned away in discomfort. The bride's hands curled at her sides, nails digging into her palms. But she said nothing. Then he pressed further. He gestured, and one of his guards scooped up the wedding gifts, tokens from human and alien delegates alike, and smashed them to the floor. Trinkets shattered, fabrics tore. The bride's lips parted as though to protest, but the words tangled in her throat. She caught the eyes of a feathered elder, who quickly looked away. No one would stop him. No one would risk offending the king. The king leaned close, his breath acrid. "Does your world think it can join our councils with ribbons and sugar?" He let the veil fall to the ground, stepped on it, and smiled. "Your husband is nothing but a clerk in uniform." I expected defiance, yet I see only a trembling child. Her throat burned, her cheeks hot with humiliation, but her voice, when it came, was steady. She looked not at him, but at the crowd, and spoke as though the room belonged to her. My husband will come." The words rippled outward, softer than a whisper, yet sharper than steel. The hall laughed. Some mocked openly. Others muttered that humans always spoke in riddles of love and loyalty, as though sentiment could rival steel. The king's smile widened, predator amused by prey's delusion. "He will come," the king repeated, savoring the phrase like wine. "Then let him see what becomes of brides who mistake fairy tales for diplomacy." His guards chuckled, a sound like boulders grinding. Whispers filled the room. Her husband? A minor envoy. A human in polished shoes. The king will crush him before he speaks. Others smirked. Humans play at politics, but carry no claws. Their strength is in laughter and little stories. They have no teeth. But not all were certain. A Nevaran scholar frowned. He had studied human history, their wars, their revolutions. He remembered a line from one of their texts: "Never mistake kindness for weakness." He leaned toward his companion, muttering, "Be careful. They smile too much." Meanwhile, subtle currents shifted. A sensor aboard the hall flickered, registering phantom fleets at the edge of neutral space. A guard's comms whispered static. One of the floating flames guttered and died, though no draft stirred. And in the shadows, unnoticed, servants paused in their tasks, eyes glinting with something too sharp for mere attendance. The bride, still standing bareheaded, let the faintest smile trace her lips. She did not cower now. She knew. The king, oblivious, roared for music to resume, for laughter to drown the echo of her defiance. He sprawled in a throne dragged into place, his armor scraping against crystal. His arrogance filled the air like poison, and the hall pretended to breathe it gladly. Then the doors groaned. At first it was only sound, wood and alloy straining as though under pressure. But then they flew wide, and silence crashed over the hall. A man stepped inside. He was not clad in armor, nor carrying a weapon. His suit was cut in the simple lines of diplomacy, earth fabric tailored with care, but no ostentation. His hair was neat, his posture unremarkable, his face almost boyish in its calm. He might have been mistaken for an accountant, had his eyes not been so still. He paused only to straighten his cuff. Then he smiled, a small, polite smile that showed no teeth, no anger, no fear. "Your Majesty," he said, voice warm with courtesy. "Thank you for attending my wedding." The hall did not exhale. The king sneered, expecting laughter to follow. But none came. The silence hung, sharp and unyielding. The bride's lips parted in relief, her eyes bright with something that looked dangerously like triumph. The man walked forward, each step deliberate, as though the ground itself had agreed to bear him. He carried nothing, not even a datapad. Yet every gaze followed, unease blooming like frost. He reached the bride's side, bowed slightly to her, then looked at the king. His smile widened just enough to reach politeness, but not warmth. "I believe," he said, softly enough that even the furthest guest leaned forward. "We have much to discuss." And for the first time that evening, the Galactic King did not look amused. The human diplomat stood before the Galactic King, as if the throne were a dinner table, and the gathering of empires a polite supper party. He adjusted his cuff once more, not out of vanity, but of ritual. His smile was small, his eyes calm, his manner utterly free of strain. In a hall where power was measured by size, firepower, or reputation, he seemed a speck. Yet the silence that followed his entrance had the density of stone. The king leaned back, laughter finally breaking through his surprise. It came low and rolling, like boulders tumbling down a mountain, meant to bury the intruder beneath its weight. "This," the king declared, spreading his clawed hands to the audience, "is the husband? This clerk in skin? This polite insect who dares speak to me as if I were his neighbor across a fence." His guards laughed dutifully, pounding the crystalline floor with their boots. The diplomat inclined his head, expression unchanged. "A neighbor, yes. Though on Earth we sometimes bring pies to new neighbors. I regret I brought nothing today but conversation." He paused, as though truly regretful, then added lightly, "But perhaps conversation is more filling than pie, depending on one's appetite." Scattered chuckles broke through the hall. Not laughter at him, but laughter despite themselves. Aliens unfamiliar with humans often mistook their humor for weakness, their warmth for naivety. Yet the diplomat spoke with such unflappable ease that even the condescending nobles found themselves listening instead of sneering. The king's gaze sharpened. You joke while your bride stands humiliated. You jest while your gifts lie in shards. Do you not burn with rage, human? Or is your kind too bloodless for such fire? The diplomat turned to the bride, brushing his fingers against hers in a touch so light it seemed accidental, yet deliberate in its reassurance. Her shoulders loosened. Then he faced the king again. On earth, we tell children not to make a scene when guests misbehave at a party. Rage is wasteful. But consequences, his eyes glimmered, the smile tightening just slightly. Consequences have their place. The words rippled across the chamber like a hidden current. Some dismissed them as empty. Others frowned, hearing in them a vibration of something far heavier. The king leaned forward, intrigued despite himself. Consequences, he said, savoring the syllables. You speak as though you are in command of them. Not command, the diplomat said softly, almost apologetic. Merely recognition. Earth has a long memory, Your Majesty. We tend to remember when hands reach where they do not belong. We write songs about such things. History books too. Children's bedtime stories, even. Murmurs fluttered through the audience. A feathered noble whispered, he speaks of threats with a smile, as if reciting nursery rhymes. A scaled matron hissed, danger hides behind his courtesy. The king's sneer deepened, but the diplomat's calm did not waver. He asked for a glass of wine, and when it was poured by a trembling attendant, he swirled it idly, watching the liquid catch the fractured starlight. This vintage is remarkable, he said, nodding at the king. A gift from your private reserves, no doubt. Generous of you. On earth, we rarely pour our enemies a drink before battle. But generosity is admirable. The king's gauntlet clenched against the armrest. You imply battle where there is none. You sit here, in my hall, at my mercy, and you think to parry me with words? Shall I crush you now, before your bride and her pitiful world? The diplomat sipped the wine, unhurried. Mercy is a curious word, he said, setting the glass down. On earth, mercy is what you extend when the knife is already at someone's throat. Otherwise, it's just tolerance. And tolerance is brittle, wouldn't you say? The hall grew tighter, the air heavier. Guards shifted uneasily. A few nobles found their eyes darting to the great windows overlooking the starfield, where distant flashes appeared, so faint they might have been tricks of light. The king gestured sharply, dismissing the tension. Enough of your riddles. Speak plainly, insect. What would you have me do? Apologize for scuffing your bride's cloth? Bend knee to your dirtball of a planet. The diplomat leaned forward at last, elbows on the crystalline table, voice low and even. I would have you consider the cost of underestimation. You touched my wife. That makes this personal. The words were quiet, but their weight silenced the chamber more thoroughly than the king's roar ever had. The bride felt his hand cover hers, steady and warm. He did not look at her, but the pressure said everything. The king bared his teeth. Personal? I have shattered empires over insults less grave than that. Do you dare threaten me here, human? The diplomat's smile sharpened. Threaten? No. Humans rarely threaten. We promise. He tapped the table with a fingertip, the sound echoing too loudly in the crystalline chamber. And we always keep promises. Whispers hissed through the guests. A reptilian elder muttered, he speaks as though earth were more than it seems. Another hissed back, yet his fleets are few, his world untested. He bluffs. But no one fully believed it. The diplomat rose, straightening his jacket with casual precision. He paced slowly, deliberately, circling the king as though unaware of the danger. His words fell like casual observations, though each one carried a needle's edge. Your Majesty's palace in the eastern quadrant, impeccable design, though the hidden armory beneath has been rather poorly maintained. Rusting cannons, faulty shielding. A shame, really. He smiled apologetically, as though critiquing a neighbor's leaky roof. The king stiffened. Your Majesty's third cousin, currently in hiding, still carrying debts from that unfortunate border war. A difficult position for a family member of such esteem. The diplomat's tone was conversational, almost regretful. We humans have a phrase, skeletons in the closet. You seem to have several. Gasps broke out. Some aliens laughed nervously, unable to stop themselves. Others looked horrified. The king's claws dug grooves into the throne's armrests. The diplomat stopped at last, standing directly before him. Forgive me. I read quickly. Reports, dossiers, transcripts. It is a dreadful habit, really, one my wife often teases me about. But information, like wine, ought to be savored, especially when one's guests expect to be entertained. The king surged to his feet, towering over him. You dare spy on me, insect? The diplomat smiled wider, though his eyes did not. Spy? No. We prefer the word preparation. Earth is new to your counsels, yes. But we've been preparing for first impressions a very long time. And I assure you, we do not enjoy being made fools of. The king opened his mouth, fury radiating from every scale. But before he could speak, the diplomat lifted a finger, silencing him with a gesture as soft as a breeze. Do you hear it? The diplomat asked the hall. Confused murmurs rose. Then they heard it. Faint static on the comms of guards, subtle hums from their wrist devices. The windows showed the faintest movements in the starfield, shapes too organized to be random, too numerous to be coincidence. The diplomat's voice lowered, rich with a patience that cut deeper than anger. Our fleets are not yet within your borders, Your Majesty. That would be impolite. But they are near. Near enough that even a sneeze from your throne would be noticed. The hall shifted from mockery to unease. Nobles exchanged frantic glances. The feathered elder murmured, How long has he been planning this? The diplomat turned to the audience, bowing slightly, charm radiating again. My apologies for the interruption of your evening entertainment. Weddings are meant for joy, not posturing. But it seems necessary to remind us all that Earth does not bluff. We prepare. We adapt. And when pressed, we correct. He turned back to the king. The smile was gone now, replaced by a flatness that froze the air. You touch my wife. That is the one correction I do not leave to chance. The king snarled, his body tensing to strike, but one of his advisors seized his arm, whispering frantically. The diplomat watched unhurried, as though observing children bicker over sweets. He lifted the glass of wine again, raising it in toast. Shall we negotiate, Your Majesty, before the galaxy learns what happens when humans stop smiling? The words hovered like the edge of a blade. The silence that followed was not of amusement, nor even of shock. It was the silence of creatures who had just realized they were standing in the wrong place, at the wrong time, with the wrong species. And the Galactic King, for the first time in an age, found himself at a loss for words. The king's silence rang louder than his threats ever had. The diplomat stood with his wine raised, smile polite, gaze unyielding, and the assembled nobles found themselves shifting in their seats as though the floor itself had grown too hot to sit upon. At first, they tried to dismiss it. After all, humans had fleets, yes, but crude ones, small ones, laughable beside the armadas of elder species. Yet unease gnawed at the edges of certainty. He had spoken with such precision, such knowledge of the king's private halls, his debts, his kin. That was not bluffing. That was architecture. The king growled low, his voice like stone dragged across stone. You bring ships to hover at my borders and call it preparation? You dare trespass on the sanctity of my reign. His claws scraped the armrest. Sparks hissed where crystal surrendered to his rage. Do you imagine Earth has weight enough to tilt the galaxy? You are a pebble beneath my boot. The diplomat's gaze did not flicker. Boots, he said softly, are only as steady as the ground beneath them. And sometimes pebbles break bones if stepped on carelessly. He set the glass down without finishing the wine, as if he already knew it was poisoned. The act sent a ripple through the crowd sharper than any shouted threat. A jeweled amphibian lord leaned to his companion. "He speaks like a poet," he whispered, but his words cut like blades. His companion only nodded, feathers shivering. The diplomat clasped his hands behind his back, strolling as if the hall were his study. "You mistake this for escalation, Majesty. It is correction. On Earth, we correct mistakes swiftly, lest they become tradition. Consider the colonies that once ruled us. They thought us beneath them, soft, naive, incapable of defiance. And yet, he let the silence finish the sentence. Every historian present knew Earth story, knew how small tribes and fractured nations had driven off giants with patience and ferocity." The king snarled, but the diplomat's tone remained mild, like a teacher explaining arithmetic to restless children. "We have a habit, you see. When confronted with cages, we break them. When mocked as prey, we adapt. When pressed, we endure until endurance itself becomes a weapon. And when underestimated," his smile flickered, brief as lightning, "that is when we are most dangerous." The crowd murmured, no longer mocking, but unsettled. A few of the wiser nobles leaned forward, realization dawning that the human's presence here was no accident. Then came the shift. Subtle at first, the servants moving in patterns too precise to be chance. One by one, trays of food were set down, not in service, but in sequence, as though marking points on an unseen map. The floating flames dimmed again, their pulses aligning in a rhythm that made the scaled matron hiss in alarm. "That is not decoration," she whispered. "That is signal." The bride rose from her seat, every eye snapping toward her. Until now she had been silent, humiliated, veiled then unveiled. But her back was straight now, her eyes clear. She walked to her husband's side, and when she spoke, her voice carried not tremor but command. "Do you think I was here only to wed?" she asked the king. "You thought me fragile, a pawn to break before the galaxy. But I was bait, and you swallowed the hook whole." Gasps erupted. The king staggered a step, not physically, but in pride, jolted by her defiance. The diplomat only inclined his head toward her, pride hidden behind the same calm smile. The bride's gaze swept the hall. "Every guest you summoned tonight was watched. Every guard you brought was counted. Every corridor of this palace was mapped before I ever walked its floor. You thought you chose the stage, Majesty, but the curtain was ours from the first act." The floating flames flared, casting long shadows that twisted across the crystalline walls. Servants dropped their trays and straightened, their disguises falling away, not warriors, not assassins, but operatives, unarmed yet dangerous with knowledge, their eyes locked on every noble in the chamber. The revelation spread through the hall like fire on dry grass. The king bellowed, rising to his full height. "Deceit, treachery." His voice shook the air, but it shook less than the revelation itself. The diplomat lifted a hand, silencing the chaos without raising his voice. "No treachery, Majesty. Transparency. We humans believe in making truths visible, even if they scorch the eyes." He turned, and with a snap of his fingers, the hall's windows flickered to life, as though they were screens. Across them blazed images, transmissions stolen and catalogued. Secret wars financed by the king, colonies starved for profit, debts hidden, bribes accepted. Each truth laid bare in colors no one could deny. The nobles cried out, some in rage, others in horror, still others in glee at their rivals' undoing. The king's face froze, the sneer collapsing into raw fury. "You dare expose me," he roared, spittle flying. "You dare turn my hall into a tribunal." The diplomat's smile thinned, razor-sharp now. "We didn't turn it. You did, the moment you touched my wife. I simply ensured the galaxy could watch your performance." The bride's voice joined his, calm, unyielding. "We are not prey. We are not dolls. We are the storm you invited to dinner." The hall erupted into chaos. Nobles argued, guards drew weapons, advisors shouted for silence. The king's aura of inevitability shattered, and in its place was the chill realization the humans had orchestrated every beat. The king lunged forward, claws slashing the air, but the diplomat did not flinch. "Strike me," he said, soft as a whisper, "and every fleet you command will be ashes before your heart beats again." "We do not need to fight you, Majesty. You've already fought yourself. We simply gave the galaxy front row seats." The king froze, the weight of the words pressing down heavier than any blade. He looked around, and for the first time, he saw fear in the eyes of those who had once bowed without question. Fear, not of him, but of the smiling human standing calm and unarmed. And then the diplomat leaned closer, so only the king could hear. "This was never about your throne. This was about the message. You thought you were hunting lambs. You did not see the wolves at your door." The king's breath rattled, caught between fury and dread. He wanted to strike, to silence, to burn, but he could not. The hall had shifted, the power inverted, and he stood on sand that slipped beneath his feet. The diplomat stepped back, addressing the crowd again, tone once more charming, almost playful. "Please enjoy the feast. There is no need for alarm. Earth is a small world, but our memory is vast. Tonight was not war. Tonight was education." The bride's laughter, low and steady, cut through the air like bells over storm tide. And lessons are best remembered when they hurt. The nobles did not laugh. They shifted, whispering feverishly, each calculating how this revelation changed the balance of power. Allies were reconsidered, debts reassessed. The galaxy itself felt as though it tilted. The king stood rigid, his shadow cast enormous against the crystalline walls, but the shape of it no longer inspired awe. It trembled, shivered, diminished. He had been tricked, exposed, undone not by fleets of steel, but by stories, by patience, by bait and hook. The diplomat turned once more to his wife, his smile softening only for her. "Shall we dance?" he asked, as though nothing monumental had occurred, as though this were still a wedding. She took his hand, lifting her chin, and together they moved to the center of the hall. The musicians, uncertain but compelled, began to play again. The tune was human, strange and uneven, but haunting. Each note fell into silence, like stones dropped into deep water. They danced while the galaxy stared, a husband and wife moving with calm grace amid the wreckage of pride and fear. The king watched, unable to tear his eyes away, rage boiling, but chained by the weight of what had been revealed. And as the music wound down, the diplomat whispered loud enough for all to hear, "This was only the beginning." The flames pulsed once more, and the palace itself shook, not from the king's fury, but from transmissions blasting outward, carrying every image, every word, every humiliation to the furthest reaches of the stars. By dawn, the galaxy would know. The king's roar shook the chamber, yet it could not drown the echo of human laughter. The king's roar was no longer the controlled thunder of a sovereign, but the ragged bellow of a beast cornered. The crystalline walls trembled, fractures spider-webbing through their glittering surfaces, as his fury radiated outward. Guards surged forward, weapons drawn, their eyes burning with the desperate loyalty of those who knew their master's pride was bleeding before the galaxy. The nobles shrieked or dove for cover as tables overturned, platters crashed to the ground, and the refined order of the feast gave way to chaos. The diplomat did not flinch. He stood still, hands clasped loosely behind his back, as though this storm had been penciled into his schedule. His wife remained beside him, chin raised, eyes unyielding, her poise a mirror of his calm. The flames flickered violently as the guards closed in, blades and plasma rifles raised, but the diplomat only sighed as if lamenting spilled wine. "I had hoped," he said lightly, voice carrying through the din with surgical clarity, "that we could keep this civil." He glanced at his wife. But then, civility is always the first casualty of arrogance. The first guard lunged. The diplomat moved not like a soldier, but like a tactician inhabiting a soldier's body. He sidestepped, caught the guard's arm, and twisted with a precision that snapped tendons rather than bones, incapacitating, not killing. The second guard swung a blade, and the diplomat pivoted, drawing the first guard into the arc. The blade sank into friendly armor. Shock spread faster than pain, and the crowd gasped. Humans had long been dismissed as amateurs in galactic combat, creatures of clumsy violence. Yet here was a man who fought with the same politeness he wielded in words, measured, efficient, devastating. Every gesture was calculated to cripple, without waste, to turn the king's own strength against him. By the time the third guard lunged, two more lay writhing on the floor. The king roared again, summoning his full company. But then the windows erupted in light. Fleets filled the void, human ships sleek and sharp, their engines humming with restrained power. They did not fire. They did not advance. They simply appeared, surrounding the system in a silent net. The message was clear. The trap had teeth. Across comms, human voices crackled, relaxed and irreverent, audible even in the hall. Target lock stable. Fleet holding position. Someone tell Dad we're waiting. The diplomat's faint smile suggested he was listening too, every syllable part of a symphony he had composed long before tonight. Panic rippled through the nobles. Some scrambled for shuttles. Others tried to pledge allegiance to the humans on the spot. The galaxy was rebalancing itself in real time, and every observer understood the shift. Earth had shown its claws. The king, however, did not yield. His pride had been wounded too deeply, his throne too nakedly undermined. He drew a massive weapon from his armor, a blade longer than the bride was tall, forged from alloys that had drunk the blood of 100 conquered worlds. He stalked toward the diplomat, each step rattling the crystalline floor. The diplomat released the last guard, who crumpled groaning to the ground, and turned slowly to face the monarch. His expression had softened, his smile faded, his eyes now stripped warmth. The mask of politeness remained, but beneath it lay something far older and colder. "Your Majesty," he said quietly, "if you wish to end this as an execution, then by all means try." The king swung. The blade cleaved the air, radiant with power, but the diplomat slipped aside, close enough that the metal tore threads from his suit. He did not counterattack. He let the king swing again, then again, each strike more furious, more reckless. The chamber shook with the force of his rage. Tables shattered, walls groaned. The diplomat remained untouched, moving with the patience of a predator letting prey exhaust itself. The bride stood tall amid the chaos, her eyes locked on her husband with something fiercer than love, trust absolute. She had endured the humiliation, the stage, the veil ripped away, because she knew this moment was his to script. At last the king faltered, breath ragged, armor scorched by his own wild strikes. The diplomat stepped close, so close their faces nearly touched. The hall held its breath. "This was never about you," the diplomat whispered. His voice was soft, almost tender, yet it carried like thunder. "You were the warning shot." The king froze, blade trembling in his grasp. He expected death, but instead came mercy far crueler than execution. The diplomat turned away, leaving him standing hollow before the galaxy, humiliated, exposed. His enemies armed not with guns, but with his secrets. The human fleets shifted formation outside, not to strike, but to encircle. Their restraint was a declaration more powerful than any volley. They did not need to fire to prove dominance. They only needed to show that they could, and that choice alone belonged to them. On the comms, laughter broke out among human captains. "Well, that was dramatic. You think he'll cry? Someone cue the victory playlist." The diplomat allowed the banter to fill the silence, letting the galaxy hear not soldiers at the edge of discipline, but people who fought wars with jokes on their lips and steel in their bones. The nobles looked on, faces pale, whispers frantic. Some saw opportunity in siding with Earth. Others saw doom. But all saw truth. Humanity was not weak, not naive, not prey. They were patient predators who smiled as they set the table and only bared teeth when it was far too late to flee. The diplomat returned to his wife, offering his hand. She took it without hesitation, and together they walked through the wreckage of the feast, through overturned tables and shattered gifts. The crowd parted before them, not daring to block their path. Even the guards who still breathed lowered their eyes. As they reached the great doors, the diplomat paused. He turned back to the hall, his voice calm once more, his smile faint but unmistakable. "Consider this a kindness. Earth does not seek war. We seek respect. But should you forget tonight, should you place your hands where they do not belong again, remember this. We have patience enough to wait, and resolve enough to end." The words fell like stones into a lake, rippling outward through every noble heart, through every trembling advisor, through every comms channel still open to the galaxy. He turned back, and the doors opened before them. Beyond lay the stars, vast and waiting, the fleets hanging in patient silence like wolves at the treeline. The bride lifted her chin, her step steady, her humiliation transformed into dignity carved in stone. She was no pawn. She was the spark. The king collapsed into his throne, blade falling from his hand, armor heaving with each breath. He had been spared, but the sparing was worse than death. He would live now in the shadow of that smile, every noble eye measuring him against the man who had walked unarmed into his hall and left with the galaxy's fear in his pocket. Outside, the fleets dispersed, not retreating but repositioning, their formation shifting into something even more precise. A signal to all who watched. Earth had not come to conquer, but it had come to stay. As the diplomat and his wife stepped into the corridor beyond, he glanced at her, and at last the mask cracked. His smile softened, his eyes warmed. "You were magnificent," he said. She squeezed his hand. "You promised," she replied. And he had kept it. The palace shuddered one last time as transmissions finished flooding the stars. Across worlds, across councils, across empires, the truth would settle in like frost. Humans smiled because they already knew the ending. The final note lingered, sharp as a blade and soft as a vow.